Okay, so at this point in our programming, we should be able to do some pretty cool stuff. We've learned about functions. We learned about a lot of the basic control flow. We should be able to write some small programs that can do specific things. They won't really be usable by people outside of programming for now, because we'll have to like write GUI interfaces for that, which is like just like a menu items and buttons and stuff that interacts with our program. That's for later though. For now, I'm going to show you some interesting and useful libraries as a beginner. And I'm going to go ahead and create a new file. So in Python, when I say libraries, I mean external code that has functions in it already built out for us, and we can just call those functions. So let's suppose that we're writing a program and we need it to take the square root of a function or square root of a number. I can do this. I could say import math, and this is importing the standard math library in Python. Math has a bunch of cool little functions we can use. And so if I want to take the square root of a number, I'll just say number equals, I don't know, 100. And I can print out, I'm going to say now, I'm going to access a function inside the math library. And to do that, I'm going to type math, just like it's written up there on line 1. I'm going to say period to access something inside of it. And I'm going to say sqrt for square root. And then I'll pass in as a parameter, as input, my number. If I save this, then I'll need to jump over to the command prompt. So I'm going to open up as a refresher for command prompt navigation. CMD, there it is. I'm going to type in dir to see what's here. I'm going to say cd, I'm going to go to documents, that's where my stuff is. cd into video lectures. What's here? Python basics, so cd Python basics. Now I'm inside Python basics where I need to be. Say Python. And I'm going to run the libraries program I just created. Right, there it is, prints out 10. So this math library can take in a number. Notice this is an integer, and it takes the square root of that integer and gives me 10. But when it printed it, it's a bit bigger so you can see, it printed it as a float. So it looks like the output of the square root function is always going to be a floating point number, which makes sense if you've ever taken the square root of a number on a calculator. We can also change the way this is represented in our code. If we don't want to write math every time to access the math library, we can say import as, and I can just say m if I want to do that, and I can change this to m dot square root of number. And that'll give me the square root. There's some other useful things in here, like you can do the power. You can say m for math because we renamed map to m in our program on line 1. So I'll say m.pow. This will return the first number raised to the power of the second number. So if I say 4 raised to the power of 3, I should have 4 times 4 times 4, which should be 64, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. So we'll jump over here, we'll run the code again. Oops, I forgot to print it. Print this. Print. Go to end. Save and run. There we go. Our second number printed out is 64. And there is a way to do this built in. We could have just said print, let's say 4 double asterisk 3, and that should be the same thing. And it is. And notice that when we double asterisk it, it's still an integer, it's not a floating point number. So these are little particular things just to remember. But if we wanted to do the square root, we could have also done that without the math library. We could have said take 100, raise that to the power of 1 divided by 2. So 100 double asterisk 1/2 is something else we can do. And this is essentially the same thing as square root of 100. That's saying 100 and raise it to the 1/2 power. And if you've taken Algebra 2 or Algebra and Math in high school, you might already know that. And if you haven't, that's okay too. There's something to keep in mind when you get into math later on. That's something you'll learn. So you might ask, well, why use the math library if we can just use double asterisk? Well, there's other functions too. Let me jump over to my browser real quick. Here's a bunch of the other ones. We can use all of these. We can use absolute value. We can get the floor function, which returns the largest integer less than or equal to x, where x is our input. We can get a ceiling. We can truncate. And there's a lot of other stuff like factorials, permutations, combinations, all sorts of good stuff we can use in here. So that's the math library. Another library we use that's very helpful is the random. And I'm going to just leave it as random when I import it. I'm not going to change it to m or something. So the random library helps us get random values. So let's say that I'm building out a video game and I need to randomize AI behavior of the enemies, or I need to, let's say I'm building Minesweeper, I need to randomize the mine placements. And so let's take that Minesweeper example, and let's build out Minesweeper, but instead of it being a grid of mines, it's just a single line of spaces, or it could be a mine or it could not be a mine. Now that won't work, and that won't actually be truly Minesweeper, but let's just assume that for this example, that's what it is, just to make it a little bit simpler. So we have a number line basically of the first cell, which first cell all the way out until the last cell. Let's say this is 1 and this is 10 out here, so we have 10 cells in our Minesweeper game. We want to get a random number between 1 and 10. The way we can do that is we can say random number, our variable, is equal to random dot, and here we're accessing the random library with this dot. We're going to say rand int to get a random integer. And then the first number we put in here, we'll say 1. That's the lower bound, the cell that's over here. The last one will be 10. That's the upper bound. That's the last cell. This will get a random number between. I'll go ahead and print this out. We'll print out random number. Save that. Clear this out. We'll run it again. Okay, this last number here is the random number. It's 8 this time. Let's run it again. See if it's 8 again. Now it's 7, because it's getting a random value. Run it again, and it's 3. So every time we run this, it's getting a random value. Now it's 1. 1 and 10. Very helpful. Has a lot of uses, uncountable amount of uses. There's some other cool stuff too we can do with random, but I'll let you go discover that online. Feel free to pause the video here to look up the random Python library and look through all the functions that are available through it. And I'm going to introduce one more library, which can also be helpful, especially in video game development. And this is going to be the time library. So say import time. And the two helpful things, I'll say probably the most helpful thing I've ever used time for is the sleep function. And that, we'll come down here, is going to pause our program for a predetermined amount of time and then resume it. So let's think of an example where we're making a video game and we're making some AI behavior, and we want an enemy to track the player, and then we want the enemy to shoot at the player, and then we want the enemy to wait for like 3 seconds and then restart that behavior. And so I'm not going to write the full implementation. I'm just going to say, let's say we called a function called track. I'm going to comment that out because it's not an actual thing we've defined yet. So we'll say track player. And then after that, we shoot at player. And after those functions resolve, we want to then wait. And so we'll say just wait, like that. Wait for next action. Now we'll define this function actually. We'll put seconds as the input parameter. That's what we're calling it. I'll define it up here at the top. I'm going to say def for define. We'll say wait for next action. It takes in a parameter called seconds. And what it's going to do is it's going to say time dot sleep to access the sleep function inside of the time library. And we'll pass in seconds as the amount of seconds, because the sleep function within time takes seconds as input, the amount of seconds you want to wait. Okay, so I got to define seconds. It's the last step of this. Come here to the top. I'll just define a global variable of seconds. We'll say it's equal to 7. All right, and so this program, it's going to do everything it just did a few seconds ago, but now it's going to wait a few seconds, then it's going to stop. And so just to show that it stopped, we'll say print program ended. All right, now let's go run this. Let's clear this out. We'll run the code. So as soon as you hit enter, I'm going to start counting seconds. So 1 1000, 2 1000, 3 1000, 4 1000, 5 1000, 6 1000, 7 1000. There it is. Program ended. That's how you do wait. Very helpful. And that's just an introduction to some libraries. There's a lot more libraries out in the world that are just as helpful, but as a beginner, I found myself using these libraries often. But that's pretty much it for this video. The next thing we're going to be covering is classes, so I'll see you then.